afternoon from Wisconsin, and I'm sure it's morning where you guys are at yet, and maybe somebody is heading towards the later afternoon or evening. And the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to play a little song, and you'll recognize it right away, I think. So here goes. Well, what I played, or that evidently not many people could hear, was A Wonderful World. What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. And the first line is, I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. And we are the Wonderful Worldwide Educators, and you can go to our website, which is wonderfulworldwideeducators.com. And from there, I would like to say a little quote I copied from the Lakota Indians, the Sioux. And it says, the old Lakota was wise. He knew that a man's heart away from nature becomes hard. He knew that a lack of respect for growing, living things soon led to a lack of respect for humans too. So he kept his children close to nature's softening influence. I think that speaks volumes. We're interested in the all natural environment. Clint Eastwood came out in Paint Your Wagon. There was a song, I Talk to the Trees. And it goes, I talk to the trees, but they don't listen to me. I talk to the stars, but they never hear me. The breeze hasn't time to stop and hear what I say. I talk to them all in vain, but suddenly my words reach someone else's ear, at someone else's heartstrings too. I tell you my dreams, and while you're listening to me, I suddenly see them come true. So it's true that your plants do hear you. I had an experience, I think I told Dwayne about this. This was when I was in Florida, and I had just purchased 2 cherry tomato bushes. They were pretty good size, and I had stuck them out on the lanai that morning. And it was a hot Florida summer day. And it was humid, and so I went down to the pool, and I was in the pool. I was there for quite a while because I was talking to people and swimming and etc. And all of a sudden, this impression comes on me, and I got distinct impressions of my tomato plants. And it was like they were saying, help. And I thought, what is that? I did respond to it, and I, got out of the pool, dried myself off, and ran to the lanai upstairs, and the tomato plants had died. And I thought, oh my goodness, maybe I didn't respond soon enough, or maybe I didn't pick up the message soon enough, but they do hear us. And I think that's the bottom line. Nature hears us, and we have to be in harmony with it. I have a real interesting article that I read on shiitake mushrooms a while ago. And shiitake mushrooms are one of my favorite mushrooms. I love them. And they grow on oak trees. They're a fungus that's native to China and Asia, parts of Asia, I guess. And it's said that they are more like animals than plants. And they have behaviors that the people think are social. And they dislike, they dislike crabby people and negative emotional environments, as plants can wilt when their owners argue. They're not fond of cigarette smoke and may balk in their fruiting around smokers. Some growers swear that shiitakes like classical music. And they fruit more generously when they are with another log or in a group of logs, because they emit pheromones that stimulate the fruiting of the mushroom. They love the negative ions from rain, and they respond to thunder and lightning. And some growers even use flashing lights or play thunderstorm music to stimulate storms, and tap their logs with hammers or drop them a foot to stimulate a branch falling off a tree during a thunderstorm. Like plants, mushrooms have communication systems with one another, with plants and animals, and with some people who are sensitive to communication and signals in nature. I just thought that was so interesting because you don't think of your mushroom communicating with you or the other mushrooms. There's a huge group of mushrooms that we see. It's by a vet clinic and by a Shell gas station, and they're huge. They're about 6 inches across, some of them, but they're in like a whole group, and I just like to look at them when I get in that way. And I'm going to talk about trees actually this is in Fort Myers, Florida. The first time I'd gone there and I went down McGregor Boulevard, I was in awe because the whole boulevard is lined with royal palms. And I don't know, they're about 75 feet tall, 65 to 75. And the bottom part of it, I guess the closest would be a smooth wrapping of cement, around the bottom of them that goes up quite a ways. And our Thomas Edison planted those. The first time he planted them, they were shipped from Cuba. He ordered 1,300 trees. And because they had a yellow fever outbreak in Cuba, a lot of the trees died, and the ones that they planted closer to the Everglades died also. He planted all over. And he was, I think by heart, Edison was a naturalist. He before he got in there, Fort Myers was known as a cow town. A lot of cattle ranchers and rustlers and cow punchers and whatever else they were called always came through with the cattle. So when Edison planted all those beautiful palms, they had no place to run the cattle. So that eventually wore itself out because they couldn't get through the land, and the beautiful trees remain. He also sent for, when some of them did die because he had left the area and the palms were to be taken care of, and the caretakers did not do that. So some of them died. So he had about 1,800 more shipped over, and those survived. And he had an assortment of pets too, believe it or not. He had monkeys, he had a pelican, he had dogs, he had cats, he had an assortment. He liked both domestic and wild animals. So I think he was a naturalist at heart. He really beautified Fort Myers. I know in not too long ago, Naples, Florida, which is kind of a hop, skip, and jump from Fort Myers, planted 6,000 trees in their city. I don't know where they put them. The only place I think they could put them was out on Immokalee Road, but they planted a ton of trees, palm trees, and that's a lot. 6,000 trees is a lot. And there are places actually all over Florida that plant the trees. So we can plant the trees too. I know that in Florida, when I lived there, when I went shopping in the hot weather, I would always try to find the one lonely palm tree in the parking lot and park under it, because just that little palm would afford the shade and the coolness that the hot beating sun did not. So although the sun is beautiful and we're like the sun, I still wanted some of the coolness of the shade of the tree. They're beautiful. They support so many systems of animals and wildlife. I mean, there's even deer eat the bark when the winter gets bad up here of the tree. And I've gotten a lot of happiness from trees. When I was real little, my aunt lived out on a lake, and across the road was the woods, and I would go in there all the time, and I would collect toads and frogs and assorted insects and pollywogs in the creek and whatnot. And it was still, it was quiet. The birds were singing. It was really a beautiful place. And we have to keep this beautiful environment of ours. My grandmother was a great gardener, and in her yard, the trees she had outside of the weeping willows and the oaks and the elm trees, she had a big plum tree, a red plum tree, and she had like 6 Chinese plum trees, and she had a peach tree. And we got many desserts and just plain fruit from that because she froze and canned every year. And so it was good stuff. I was very lucky to have her living with us because she went to the grocery store every day. We always had fresh vegetables and fresh meat, no matter what. And I think it gives you a good start in life, that's for sure. And it's to keep our environment going, we have to plant trees. What did I read? I read something not too long ago that one tree alone can absorb 48 pounds of CO2 a year. And trees, we work in harmony with the plants and the trees because we put out CO2, they absorb it, and in turn they put out the oxygen that we need to survive. So it's really a good thing to plant trees. I know in Florida they had a lot of trouble. Somebody imported, well, they wanted to get rid of some of the swampy, marshy land. And Florida, of course, is mostly swamp, especially southern Florida. And so they imported the Melaleuca plant from Australia. Well, because they wanted to get rid of the marsh, they planted it along all the waterways and everything. And in turn, they killed the natural environment for the fishes and everything else because they kind of overtook, and they emit an oil. And you can start that on fire. It will catch fire and it'll burn, but you can't kill the tree because it comes back. And when they sprout and fruit, there's seeds. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of seeds that get spread. And so this tree has basically taken over southern Florida. And the seeds in the fruit are fine in Australia because their native bats and birds eat that fruit and the seeds. But here, the animals don't and the birds don't. They don't seem to like it, I guess, or it isn't good for them. Isn't in harmony with them. So there's some neat websites we have. Not only the www.wonderfulworldwideeducators.com, but we have the www.newtrees.strikingly.com and www.treetalkers.strikingly.com. And Dwayne has a great article called The Tree Talkers, New Trees for All. And he says it's a new day for new trees, and trees are wonderful. They do so much for your planet Earth. And we're doing our part for all the trees of this planet Earth. So,
can I make a little comment, Sandy?
Yeah, I think your chicken beat you to it.
Who?
I think you're.
Oh,
He's speaking for you.
Sorry about that. It kind of brings to mind about the California oak, the live oak. You know, I don't know how many know about this tree, but it's one of those trees that grew based on the environment that it's in, and it doesn't need any topical watering. The tap roots on these trees are enormous, and you can't water them. If you do, you kill them. So it's a perfect example of what's happened to one whole group of trees, like here in the Los Angeles, Southern California area, that's little by little dying off because they keep building more and more housing and planting more and more grass and more stuff, you know, of a superficial nature, and it's literally extremely detrimental to that particular tree in this state anyway. So.
Yeah, it seems like when you monkey with the environment, with the natural environment, things get messed up. When I lived in Phoenix, I was absolutely shocked at when people water their lawns, and mind you, they put in their own lawns, and to keep them green, they flood the lawn with about a foot of water, and then eventually, of course, it absorbs. But in the meantime, it put out a lot of molds and fungus and everything that their watering, started. So, you've really got to do some research as to what is in tune with the environment. I mean, they're in a desert, for heaven's sakes, and they're having lawns. Have a cactus or two, you don't have to worry too much about them. It's just like the people in Florida too. These people, since it's such a tropical or semi-tropical environment, you have a lot of people who buy, let's say, exotic snakes, boa constrictors, pythons, and whatnot, or some exotic pet iguanas they're finding now. Uh, these people get to a point where they say, your 8 foot or 10 foot python is too much for you to handle. So instead of taking it to the zoo, they let it go in the wild. And what's happening is these invasive species are devouring. I mean, they can eat a whole deer, one of those big ones when they get big enough, and they're finding really big ones, 20-foot ones they're finding. That takes away from the whole environment. And they're a real problem there. They even have snake hunters now that go out and capture them because it's such a problem. There is a beautiful place in Naples, Florida, that's called the Naples Conservancy, and they talk all about conservation. You can take a water trip in a boat. I know I used to take my grandson there, and you'd go down the river and see the mangroves and everything, and birds, and they have an animal hospital there. If you find an owl that has a broken wing or something, you can take it to the conservancy. They don't like it when you bring in crows, or like I did that one time. I had to take it back to Fort Myers to another place. But they do take in animals that have been injured in the wild, and they have hands-on for the children. There's live turtles, there's snails, there's even a stingray, I believe, the last time I was in there, a small one. That's a non-touch part. But a lot of things they have there that teach children about conservation and the beauty of nature. They have nature trails, birding trails, really, because you can go and you can see the great herons, the green herons, the egrets. They're roosting in trees if you get later in the afternoon. And I loved the summer at Fort Myers Beach because the roseate spoonbills would come in, and those are those pink with a big spoon on the end of their beak, and they gobble up the small shells and snails and whatnot, frogs, whatever, that inhabit the area. And so it's a really, really wonderful place to take your children, or for yourself. There's certain days that are free, certain days are not. We have to pay, but it's all worth it to train our children and to get them in tune and to see the environment, let them experience it. I had lived in the Everglades and for about a year because that was one of my life's dreams. But it was okay. I kind of liked the other parts of Florida better, but it was not a lot. I mean, there was a lot of gators, that's for sure, because you had to watch when you drove down the road because they would scurry across at a very high speed. And of course, you would see the ones that were hit by cars, and it was every day. It wasn't just one every now and then. It was every day. There was once one of our friends was driving down the road in the Everglades, and a buzzard flew into the windshield of her car and injured her. So, we're invading, in certain respects, their environment. And talk to them, like you did, like you had with your birds. You can talk to them, and you can talk to the plants. They respond, and they talk back to you. Hug a tree, see what they have to say to you. It's an interesting communication with nature. We do have a real purpose here. And go to our website and look up all the things that Dwayne, the great writer, has put out. They're wonderful. They're marvelous. You can even put in his name, DwayneTheGreatWriter.com, and it'll bring up a lot of books he's written, tons of articles. We have radio talk shows. We have a lot of stuff you can look up. So right now we're involved in planting trees, and I wholeheartedly support that. It's a wonderful thing to replace them back in the environment. I know I was very upset when they built the apartments behind us. We had a nice woods back there, and a lot of animals and birds. And now there's 14 condos back there in a gated community, and they even mistakenly, I don't know what kind of trouble they got in, but they wiped out our neighbors' trees. And they weren't supposed to. They were on our neighbor's property. They just took their bulldozers or whatever they use, or tree cutters, and then bulldozed it out. Almost all their trees are left with a couple, and it's like, huh? What are you guys doing? They took more than they should have, but that's what happens sometimes. We get into the environment. Even the dead trees that you see, I think they're kind of pretty, actually. They provide food and shelter for many insects. I know with that Melaleuca that I talked about that they imported from Australia, it was getting so bad that they decided to import a certain beetle, that is supposed to help with getting rid of those trees, but so far the project hasn't worked.
There was an interesting story about the Hawaiian Islands. They've been for most of their existence done everything they can to keep the snakes out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, instead of the snakes being overrun, they had a rat problem. So some brainiac decided, you know what? There's a little animal called, I think it's a mongoose. Maybe those guys have a rat problem. So what did they do? They imported the mongooses in there. Now the place is overrun with mongooses, and what they didn't consider was that the rats forage at night, the mongooses forage during the day. So they never see each other.
They didn't do their research.
No, they did not.
I didn't know. Somebody in Hawaii, when I lived there, wanted me to do a condo sit for them while they went back to the States for a little bit. And he said, don't forget to water the banana trees. Okay. So I'm from Wisconsin. I land on the islands, and I'm house sitting. Well, I watered the banana trees like we always water in Wisconsin. The next morning, they had all fallen over. The root system of a banana tree is very small. I didn't do my research, and I felt so bad, And these were tall banana trees. I mean, we're not talking little bush here. We're talking 20-foot trees. I'm just thankful they didn't fall on the condo. But I had no idea. I didn't do my research. Plant the plants and study when you live in a certain environment. Don't upset it. It's that way. It's all natural, and that's what we want.
Let me give you one. This is a very important principle that anybody that's got a garden or fruit trees need to know about the proper caretaking time of the harvest and when they have to let the crops drop. There's a whole bunch. There used to be a whole bunch of pineapple plantations in Hawaii. Not so much anymore. But we were back there in the 80s, and we went on one of those little tours, and we saw these different rows of pineapples, and they all looked like they were ready to harvest. And I asked the guy, I said, I don't understand. How come these are so big and those are so small? He said, well, what happens is that we have to allow the ones that are growing to the point of being the largest, are marketable. We pick those. The little guys, we just let them die and drop into the ground. And the next year, they become the big guys.
Yeah.
So that's a principle of gardening that I don't think very many people truly understand. They think, well, if we give it plenty of minerals and plenty of vitamins and plenty of all the good soil and all this stuff, but they don't realize there's elements that come from the sun that do not enter that plant except through the fruit. And the fruit doesn't dump the stuff back through its veins into the tree. It drops it back into the soil that the tree takes up and brings it back into the fruit for the next growing cycle. So
Right.
the only way it gets there is, first of all, you got to let that fruit or vegetable ripen completely and fall off the tree. Now that's of course hoping you don't have a bunch of hungry chickens around that are going to eat everything before it gets back in. But that's the principle of it is very simple. So that's an important part of the fruit vegetable stuff.
It is. We have to be very aware of what type you're planting, whatever it is, be it a pineapple or be it an oak tree or a pine tree. You have to know the planting seasons. You have to dig a certain depth. You have to water a certain way. I mean, it all, just like we feed our body, all the good stuff that are healthy stuff. They have requirements too. It's not just a tree standing there and it rains, oh goody, uh, and your garden and everything. You have to water your garden and talk to your plants. I know I had a funny experience. We built a new home out in the country, and our neighbors, it was a row of our houses. He had bought some really beautiful tomato plants, big, mind you, and he was planting them, and then he walks over to me and he hands me a coffee can full of these scraggly, half-dead tomato plants, and he says, "Here, you want them?" I thought, well, let me plant them, see what happens. I planted them, and I talked to them, and I watered them, and he came over one day. He says, "Are those the tomato plants I gave you?" I go, "Yep." He says, "They're bigger than mine." So it depends, he was kind of a gruff guy anyway, but they pick up all your emotions, just like the shiitake didn't fruit when it had negative, angry people around it. It should all be in harmony, because there is a natural environment that is harmonious. Everything works together: plants, animals, us. And
I got another real good example for you on the opposite side of that. I did back in the day when I had my other house. We had trees, we had vegetables, we had everything. And I had planted this one tree, cherry tree, on the downhill side with several other fruit trees. And it, for whatever reason,
he has a lot to say.
yeah. He was talking to me all the time, but he wasn't giving me the fruit based on what I was been led to believe this particular tree was supposed to produce. And not knowing and understanding that the cherry tree needs a certain number of hours of freeze time during its, let's just say, its pre-fruit season. That's why you have to plant them in the right place. Otherwise, they won't get a freeze. And the only way you can augment that would be to pack the tree with ice for about 3 weeks continuously. Yeah. So it would change whatever's going on inside it. Well, as it turns out, I went down to that tree and I had a long talk with it. And I just simply basically told it, if you're not going to give me what I want, you can leave. And you know what happened? That year it left.
It did. Well, see?
Yeah, it just left. That was it. It died right there. Now I watched it shrivel up and blow away right before my eyes. And in that moment, I thought, wow.
Yeah.
I could have done the opposite. I could have asked it what it needed to produce the stuff I wanted. But I didn't do that. See, it was the other way around. It was just supposed to do the grower told me it should do without any other information. And I didn't take the time to look it up. So good stuff.